In 1967, humanity encountered an alien species on Mars for the very first time, and that was also when the First War began. These aliens, whose goal was to wipe out humankind, were called the Betha. In response, humans began developing weapons to fight back. The first major battle took place on the Moon, where humanity deployed combat robots and heavy artillery against the Betha. Despite their efforts, they still couldn't stop the invasion. By 1973, human technology had advanced significantly, and the fight against the Betha continued. The aliens showed no mercy, relentlessly attacking humanity and attempting to take over Earth. Then, in 1997, in the imperial capital of Japan, Kyoto, a new chapter of the struggle against the Betha began. That day, 3 students named Aki, Izumi, and Shimeko were standing on a bridge, watching the river flow beneath them. They noticed one of their friends, Yuri, walking toward them while reading a school textbook. The 3 of them waved and called out to her. Yui smiled and walked over to greet them. A moment later, 2 combat robots flew above them, creating a strong gust of wind that nearly lifted their skirts. Yui told her friends that those were tactical surface fighters, combat robots they would one day use after graduation. The specific model was the Type 82 Zukaku, a machine developed by Yui's father. Yui and her friends attended a training academy for the Capital Defense Forces. That morning in class, their teacher explained that soldiers in their first battle against the Betha could usually last only 8 minutes. If they managed to survive beyond that, it would mark the first step toward becoming skilled pilots. While the teacher was explaining, Yui's friends were chatting among themselves. Izumi looked especially tired since she had stayed up late talking on the phone with her boyfriend. Her boyfriend had recently been transferred to Kyushu. Shimeko pointed out that everyone in Kyushu had been evacuated a year ago, but Izumi said he mentioned something about a new base being built there. Yui tried to remind them to stay focused, but before she could say anything, their teacher suddenly called them out. Yui quickly stood up straight. The teacher then asked Yui to explain what the Betha were. With confidence, she answered that the Betha were alien beings intent on destroying humanity. Suddenly, another girl, Kazusa, stood up and added that the Betha were extraterrestrial creatures not from Earth, whose purpose was to annihilate humankind. Yui and Kazusa locked eyes for a brief moment before the teacher told them both to sit down and continue the lesson. During lunch breaks, several students were seen working on assembling training robots. Meanwhile, Yui and her friends were chatting outside the classroom. They started talking about Kazusa, discussing how her family had a long history of serving as tactical surface fighter pilots rather than as royal officials. Some of Yui's friends joked that Kazusa might be Yui's rival. Yui denied it, saying she didn't see Kazusa that way. As they sat down to eat lunch together, Izumi began reading a letter from her boyfriend, but Aki couldn't resist teasing her a little. Everyone laughed, lightening the mood. One day in autumn, Shimeko and Yui were riding a bus together. Shimeko asked if Yui's father was still overseas. Yui replied that he often traveled back and forth, but even when he returned to Japan, he was always busy in Tokyo. Not long after, they saw a car pass by, an expensive one that happened to be carrying Kazusa. Seeing that, Shimeko sighed and said that families of high status should be setting better examples for ordinary citizens. Yui laughed, saying Shimeko sounded just like their teacher. When Yui finally arrived home, her face lit up with excitement. She saw several cars parked along the street near her house. Her uncle, Lieutenant Colonel Eiji, had come to visit. Yui immediately greeted him with a salute. Eiji was surprised to see how much she had grown and how capable she had become. He asked her to keep his visit a secret since his new posting hadn't been made official yet. He told her to just call him Uncle as usual. Eiji was curious how Yui had known he was there, and she explained that she noticed the security vehicles parked nearby. Eiji chuckled in disbelief, mentioning that he had specifically declined an escort. Yui laughed softly at his reaction. They sat down for tea, and Eiji shared a message from Yui's father. He wanted Yui to keep working hard in her training. Her father couldn't leave Ichigaya for the time being. Yui said she had already guessed as much and asked if it was due to an emergency situation, but Eiji didn't know the details. Yui was scheduled to begin her live training soon. Eiji explained that at the National Defense Training School, the students would practice using the Gekishin units, and once they graduated, they would be allowed to pilot the Zukaku. Both Gekishin and Zukaku were impressive tactical robots, but they still hadn't succeeded in defeating the Betha. It seemed they would need far more tactical surface fighters to handle situations like that. After hearing this, Yui asked for a chance to try one out herself. However, Eiji reminded her that while the country's defense was important, the idea of sending young girls to the front lines hadn't been considered yet, so she shouldn't rush things. Yui then asked how long Eiji planned to stay in Kyoto. Eiji told her he would return to Tokyo as soon as his work in Kyoto was finished. Eiji mentioned that he regretted missing out on Yui's mother's home-cooked meat dishes, and Yui innocently offered to cook for him next time. Eiji laughed softly and patted Yui's head before gazing up at the beautiful evening sky over Kyoto. That night, Eiji and his colleagues visited the Kubun residence to meet Yui. Yui asked why, out of all 5 noble families, Eiji chose to visit the Kubun family. Eiji said he wanted to show her something, then handed her a file containing information about a new weapon. Yui expressed her hope that this new weapon could finally bring an end to the war, and Eiji shared that same hope. The next day, Yui and her friends were in the changing room putting on their pilot suits. The suits were tight and form-fitting, which made Aki blush and say they felt a little embarrassing. Shimeko teased Amamiya, saying that a kid like her should be shy about something like that. Meanwhile, Kazusa kept staring at Yui. It was clear she really wanted to beat her. The students climbed into their tactical surface fighters and prepared their protective gear and weapons. Yui and her friends began activating their machines. Once ready, they launched into the air. Their instructor reminded them to stay as close to the ground as possible. Aki, however, flew her unit too high and triggered a height warning before colliding with a laser beam. After that, the instructor told them to switch to ground formation and engage mock enemies. The machines moved carefully, avoiding contact whenever possible, but an accidental collision occurred. The instructor declared that everyone had failed and ordered them to return to base, giving them a punishment of 10 laps around the field. Yui and her friends carried out the laps as instructed, then resumed their training. This time, they had to hold their positions and fire at targets ahead. The instructor urged them to keep fighting, reminding them that in real combat, those who gave up first would be the first to fall. During a training match, Kazusa faced off against Yui. Kazusa managed to push Yui back, and just as she was about to finish her attack, Yui countered and struck back, damaging part of Kazusa's unit. Yui then landed a clean hit on Kazusa's robot's shoulder, securing her victory. During the break, Kazusa was rinsing her hair when Yui approached and handed her a towel. Kazusa smiled and accepted it. That evening, Kazusa joined Yui and the others for a snack run. The group was cheerful and welcoming, making Kazusa feel like part of their circle. Later that night, when they tried sneaking back into the school, they were caught by their instructor. As punishment, they were assigned to clean the tactical surface fighters used in training. One autumn night, a robot unexpectedly malfunctioned and exploded. Emergency crews rushed to evacuate the injured, while several students watched in shock. The instructor told them that if they couldn't handle witnessing something like that, they might not be ready to be there at all. After the incident, a few students decided to withdraw from the program and said their goodbyes. By 1998, war had broken out between humans and the Betha on the Korean peninsula. Civilians could only watch from afar as the battles raged on. At the same time, Eiji, who was stationed at the Ichigaya Weapons and Technology Defense Center, received reports about the situation. He realized that the fortresses were eventually being overrun, and it was only a matter of time before Japan would come under attack. That night, a fleet led by Captain Izumo with Emiya among its ranks prepared to head toward the battlefield. The first officer reported that the Betha had entered the Tsushima Strait from the southern part of the Korean peninsula and that more were on their way. Captain Izumo knew their fleet wouldn't be able to hold off such a massive assault, especially since some allied ships were caught in a storm. Even so, he ordered his crew not to let the Betha reach the mainland, because if they did, tens of thousands of people would lose their lives. In July, lines of tanks fired their cannons toward the sea, trying to stop the Betha from reaching the mainland. The cannons kept firing non-stop, but the Betha continued to push forward toward land. Their attacks had already started spreading across Kyushu. That day, Izumi suddenly screamed in shock, and her friends immediately gathered around her. Kazusa came over and asked what was happening to Izumi. It turned out that Izumi's boyfriend, who had been transferred to Kyushu, had fallen in battle. Even Shimeko's cousin, who lived in Tottori, had died because he couldn't evacuate in time. Yui tried her best to comfort Izumi, who was crying uncontrollably. Meanwhile, the news broadcast reported that Betha forces from northern Kyushu and the Sanin region on the western side of Honshu were approaching the mainland. Japanese and American troops stationed in Japan were planning to join forces and form a defensive line connecting Maizuru and Kobe to protect the capital. Evacuation orders had already been issued across several regions. Only then did Yui and her friends realize that the reason their training had been accelerated was so they could soon be deployed to help. Several areas were in the process of evacuation, including Osaka, Shiga, Nara, Wakayama, Mie, and Aichi. During one of these evacuations, an elderly man suddenly decided to return to Kyoto. He believed that if the capital fell, there would be no point in fleeing to Tokyo. His family tried to stop him, but he insisted on going back to Kyoto. At the same time, the cadets at the pilot training dormitory strengthened their resolve to fight. Yui practiced with determination, Izumi couldn't stop thinking about her late boyfriend, and Kazusa seemed fired up to destroy the Betha. When the day of departure finally arrived, Yui said goodbye to her mother and family. They were deeply moved as they watched her leave. Yui's mother expressed how proud she was that her daughter was dedicating herself to serve the nation and its people. Before leaving, Yui saluted her mother with respect and gratitude. By July 31, the final line of defense in Kyoto had completely collapsed. The 27th Recon Unit had encountered the 3rd Betha wave just 6 kilometers west of Azuru. The D-21 and A-19 Recon units had been shot down by laser attacks. At the same time, intense battles were taking place around Fukuchiyama. Because Yui and her team were still in training and lacked combat experience, their mission was to guard the Arashiyama base in Kyoto. They weren't allowed on the front lines since sending them there would only burden the other troops. Their most important duty was to protect the base at all costs. Although they understood that the decision made sense, being labeled as a burden still stung. Izumi especially couldn't let go of her desire to avenge her boyfriend's death. Suddenly, Kazusa rushed in and reported that the Betha had broken through the defensive line and were advancing toward Takagame, not far from their base. The group ran outside to see the battle for themselves. Sure enough, it looked like the defense troops were starting to get overwhelmed. When one of the mechs approached the base to resupply, it was suddenly hit by a laser strike and exploded. Yui and the others were stunned by what they saw. Yui couldn't help but think that the world might truly be heading toward collapse. It had been a long time since any country had even been able to count the number of casualties anymore. Then, a sudden emergency alert blared across the comms. Betha had been detected just 10 kilometers west of the base. Yui and her team immediately rushed to their tactical surface fighters. Shimeko was puzzled, wondering why the Betha had advanced so quickly and were now targeting the ammunition depot behind the front line. But Yui disagreed, saying that they were now the ones standing on the front line. The team activated their machines and began moving forward. Reports came in saying that more Betha were arriving in massive numbers. The leading force consisted of destroyer-class units, followed by grappler-class with the laser-class positioned in the rear. Yui hoped that she and her friends would make it through the battle safely. With determination in their hearts, they took off, flying straight toward the incoming assault. During the battle against the Betha, the squad leader ordered Yui to take command of the 2nd Tactical Surface Fighter Unit, which would focus on attacking the destroyer-class enemies. Meanwhile, the 1st unit, under the squad leader's direct control, was tasked with protecting the 3rd unit, which would concentrate on engaging the grappler class. The leader reminded everyone that if they saw any laser fire in the sky, they had to prioritize eliminating the laser-class enemies first. Yui and her teammates stood ready on the front line, waiting for the destroyer class to appear. Soon, Yui signaled that the enemy was approaching. The squad leader instructed her team to lure the Betha as close as possible and to stay below 100 meters in altitude. As the Betha forces closed in, the squad leader ordered a shift to the Arrowhead 1 attack formation. All tactical surface fighters advanced, preparing to fire in unison. Shimeko appeared nervous and began firing repeatedly at the Betha. Yui quickly reminded her to recall their training on how to deal with the destroyer class. Following Yui's command, the team ascended and opened fire from above. After successfully hitting several targets, Shimeko managed to destroy a few destroyer-class units and smiled with relief, proud of what she had accomplished. Suddenly, a warning flashed. A laser-class enemy had appeared nearby. Yui noticed Shimeko had flown past the safe altitude limit and tried to warn her. Shimeko realized it too late. A laser beam struck her unit, causing it to explode. Izumi was shocked, and Aiki cried out her name in horror. The squad leader told everyone not to panic, explaining that if they stayed close to the other Betha, the laser class would be less likely to target them. Kazusa then asked where the laser class was hiding. The squad leader responded that it was positioned at 2 o'clock, about 1,200 meters away, near the transmitter station. Kazusa quickly located the target, locked on, and prepared to fire. But before she could take the shot, she heard Izumi's desperate voice. She was under attack. Kazusa immediately redirected her aim and fired to protect Izumi. Betha forces kept coming in waves. Aiki was also firing but soon ran out of ammunition. Just as Betha was about to overpower her, Yui rushed in and took it down just in time. The squad leader urged everyone to stay focused on their assigned targets and reminded them not to let the enemy reach the 3rd unit. The team continued to fire at the incoming Betha. Aiki drew her sword and slashed through several enemies. She felt a surge of relief, telling Yui that she had surpassed her 8-minute survival mark. But before Yui could respond, another Betha lunged at Aiki, destroying her unit in a fiery explosion. Yui was devastated by Aiki's death. Despite their losses, Yui and her teammates managed to destroy the laser-class enemies. The Betha force was temporarily pushed back, but soon another wave began approaching their position. The squad leader was confused. There was only supposed to be one enemy group. He tried to contact command for confirmation, but there was no response. Realizing something was wrong, he suspected that the main force might have been wiped out. Repeated attempts to reach headquarters went unanswered, and soon it became clear the Arashiyama weapons base had fallen to the Betha. Meanwhile, the Yawata defense line was still holding its ground, but the soldiers were heavily outnumbered. Even their captain's unit was destroyed in battle. Despite their efforts, the Betha eventually broke through the Yawata line. At that moment, Eiji was still at the Ichigaya command post. He hadn't realized the defeat was this severe. He asked his aide about the American forces, and the report came back that U.S. troops had deployed tactical surface fighters from the Theodore Roosevelt carrier through the Biwa Canal to support Japan's defense. Eiji was surprised by their sense of duty, though he doubted it would change the tide of battle. He thought the defenders might soon have to make some very difficult decisions. Above all, Eiji silently hoped that UB would survive the fight. Meanwhile, at Lake Biwa, the 2nd Naval Combat Boat Fleet, Owari, was preparing for battle. The admiral ordered his troops to ready their main weapons. At that moment, Yui and her team were still firing at the incoming Betha forces. One of the creatures leaped toward Yui, but she reacted quickly, pushing it back, stomping it down, and finishing it with a shot. Their situation grew worse as the number of Betha increased rapidly surrounding their position. Their ammunition began running low, and some had already run out. The squad leader realized their position was no longer strategic and ordered all units to retreat to Line 8. Yui's teammates started taking off, but she noticed that Izumi was still fighting, swinging her sword fiercely at the Betha. Yui called out, urging her to fall back, but Izumi refused. She wanted revenge for what she had lost. It wasn't until Yui mentioned Imiena's name and referred to her as a fellow pilot that Izumi finally followed orders and retreated with the others. The squad leader shouted for Yui's team to move faster as the Betha continued to chase them. Suddenly, a laser attack warning appeared. The squad leader told everyone to stay calm and keep their altitude low to avoid being hit. But then, in an instant, he was struck by a laser and went down. Izumi was shocked, wondering how that was possible since he had been flying so low. Kazusa suspected that the enemy had expanded their laser firing angle. The Betha kept closing in. The nearest safe zone was across the hill, about 120 seconds away. One by one, their teammates were shot down by laser fire. Izumi yelled for Yui to do something, while Kazusa begged her to take command so they wouldn't all die there. Yui immediately took over, ordering everyone to push their engines to the limit and fly as close to the ground as possible. They released anti-laser smoke, but the beams cut right through it, striking another member of the squad. Izumi shouted that it was useless, but Yui insisted that they couldn't give up. They kept flying low, but now only 3 of them were left. The timer showed 60 seconds. Then, out of nowhere, massive explosions erupted. It was naval artillery fire, targeting the advancing Betha forces. The admiral declared that a soldier's duty was to complete the mission, and that he alone would bear the responsibility for what came next. The bombardment wiped out the Betha that had begun invading the city and nearby residential areas. In the city, monks prayed for the safety of everyone still fighting. The civilians could only watch helplessly as their ancient capital, over 1,200 years old, was destroyed. Mecha units continued firing relentlessly to hold back the Betha. Yui tried contacting the command post, but their ammunition was completely spent. Izumi suddenly remembered something from school, how Betha were said to consume human bodies. The thought terrified her, convinced that they might soon share that fate. Yui told her to hang on, reminding her that the 3 of them had already survived past the 8-minute death limit. Izumi whispered her wish to someday avenge her boyfriend and her fallen friends. Yui reassured her that they could keep fighting, together with the rest of the forces still holding the line. Then Kazusa noticed something on the motion sensors. They scanned the area but saw nothing. Without warning, a Betha burst out from a nearby building and lunged straight at Yui. The creature pinned her mecha to the ground, trapping her underneath. Kazusa wanted to shoot but couldn't risk hitting Yui at such a close range. Yui shouted for Izumi to fire. A moment later, the Betha exploded into pieces. It turned out that Izumi hadn't fired, the shot came from elsewhere. A Type 94 Shiranui Unit 1C landed right in front of them. The pilot was their instructor. He told them that surviving past the 8-minute mark proved they were becoming real pilots. From now on, he said they should address him as captain, because they were no longer just trainees, they were in a real battlefield. He promised to protect them and ordered them to head to Kyoto Station at Line 8, where they could regroup and restock ammunition. The 3 were reluctant to leave him behind, but he firmly insisted that they follow orders. Yui, Izumi, and Kazusa then took off toward Kyoto Station. Watching them go, the instructor hoped that one day he would see them again, as true, fully fledged pilots. As the Betha swarmed closer, he raised his weapon and opened fire, determined to hold them back no matter what. While Yui was flying, she occasionally glanced back to check on her instructor, who was struggling behind her. She wanted to help, but she couldn't. she had to keep moving forward. Yui contacted the command post to report that she and her teammates, the 2nd Arashiyama unit, would be entering from the west. Unfortunately, during their flight, a group of Fort-class Betha appeared and blocked their path, forcing the 3 of them to crash. Yui's tactical surface fighter was too damaged to operate any further, so she quickly got out and tried to contact Kazusa and Izumi. There was no response. Determined to find them, Yui kept moving through the wreckage until she found Izumi's TSF. But Izumi wasn't there, only a small photograph of her and her boyfriend remained inside. Yui pressed on, searching the area near the fallen unit. There were traces of blood everywhere, and when she followed them, she froze in horror. She saw Izumi's lifeless body being consumed by several soldier-class Betha. Yui immediately turned off her flashlight and tried to stay silent. Suddenly, Kazusa's voice came through the comms. Yui asked where she was and began heading toward her location. At that moment, Kazusa's TSF was surrounded by Betha, tearing apart its armor piece by piece. Inside, Kazusa was in pain, struggling to stay conscious while calling out to Yui. Desperation filled her voice as she begged Yui to end her suffering before the Betha reached her. Yui finally found Kazusa's unit, still being swarmed by the creatures. With trembling hands, Yui aimed her pistol at the Betha, ready to fire, but when Kazusa pleaded for her to shoot, Yui couldn't bring herself to do it. She screamed in anguish and pulled the trigger several times into the air, unable to point the weapon at her friend. Powerless, Yui fell to her knees, forced to watch as Kazusa was dragged away and killed. Just as the Betha turned toward Yui, a powerful blast hit the creatures, throwing her backward. A Take Mikazuchi Type TSF had arrived, its sword drawn as it descended. The unit landed with incredible force, slashing through the swarm and firing rounds that obliterated the remaining Betha nearby. Then everything went dark for Yui. When she woke up, she found herself in the student infirmary. Her body was weak, but she managed to step outside, only to be met with a sight that broke her heart. Kyoto had fallen. The city was nothing but ruins, completely overrun by the Betha. The world seemed to be ending, and human casualties had become impossible to count. Yui couldn't help but wonder if humanity was nearing total collapse. A nurse noticed Yui wandering outside and quickly called out to her, reminding her that she wasn't in any condition to walk around. The nurse gently brought her back inside. As they entered, the sound of a crying baby echoed through the room. Yui began to cry as well, prompting the nurse to ask if she was in pain. 3 years later, Yui was on a transport aircraft, staring out the window. She had made herself a promise, never to cry again. On the day she was rescued and treated at the infirmary, she swore she would never allow the world to fall into ruin ever again. One day, the robot piloted by Teresa was being targeted by the one controlled by Kriska and Inia. Teresa was caught off guard when Kriska managed to lock onto her position. She quickly took off, trying her best to evade the pursuit. Kriska seemed to enjoy it, hoping to see the colors of Teresa's desperation unfold. That same day, on May 2, 2001, a transport plane was flying over Alaska, carrying 2 American soldiers, Yuya and Vincent. Vincent pointed out the Yukon River to Yuya and asked what kind of challenges the Spirit of Alaska might have in store for them. Looking rather uninterested, Yuya replied that all he planned to do was eat salmon roe and sleep. Vincent couldn't believe his attitude. He reminded Yuya that they were representatives of the United States and should make their country proud. Yuya, however, dryly commented that it felt more like they had been demoted. Vincent mentioned that the Yukon base was home to tactical surface fighters from all around the world. Hearing that, Yuya recalled the days when he used to fight alongside his friends. Not long after, their plane began its landing approach, but suddenly, an alarm blared, signaling danger. Meanwhile, the battle between Teresa and Kriska continued. Teresa grew frustrated, wondering why she couldn't shake Kriska off her tail. A warning message came through ordering her to return to base. She ignored it, believing that if she stopped now, Kriska and Inia would surely defeat her. Back on the plane, Yuya rushed into the control room to find out what was happening. He learned that 2 tactical surface fighters had entered the training zone and were now flying dangerously close behind the aircraft. The pilot was confused about why they were maneuvering that way and began to panic as the situation grew more dangerous. Seeing the pilot's hesitation, Yuya firmly told him to stay calm and keep the plane steady. At that moment, Teresa fired at Kriska. Yuya took over the controls and instructed the pilot not to climb, insisting that they maintain a straight path to the runway. The 2 mecha continued their high-speed chase near the plane. Soon, Kriska locked onto Teresa's position again, which surprised her. Kriska felt a strange sense of satisfaction, knowing she had made Teresa nervous. When the plane finally touched down safely, the pilot sighed in relief, saying Yuya was definitely suited for the Yukon base. Teresa, however, was furious, frustrated that she couldn't outmaneuver Kriska. Kriska asked her command unit for permission to eliminate her target, but Enia quickly urged her not to take things too far. Despite that, Kriska fired another round from above, forcing Teresa's unit to crash. Yuya and Vincent hurried over to the crash site to make sure the pilot was safe. Yuya reached out a hand to help, but Teresa, still angry and embarrassed, refused and shouted in frustration toward Kriska. Meanwhile, Kriska reported to the command post that the opposing pilot had survived. She then flew back toward the base. Enia admitted that she was scared, worrying that Teresa might be seriously hurt. Kriska reassured her, saying that Teresa was fine and she had confirmed it herself. Enia asked whether their own tactical surface fighters, or even they themselves, might end up destroyed someday. Kriska confidently told her not to worry, promising that she would protect her. Enia smiled, feeling relieved and trusting Kriska completely. At the same time, Teresa, Yuya, and Vincent were being escorted to their dormitory. Vincent was amazed by the number of tactical surface fighters stationed there. He guessed that the base was truly serious about gathering top pilots and machines from around the world. With that kind of collaboration, he believed humanity would finally stand a chance against the Betha. The project, known as Prominence, was an international initiative to develop the next generation of tactical surface fighter technology. The United Nations had designated the Yukon base as a central hub for foreign military units that had lost their home countries, allowing them to continue research and development. The ultimate goal was to bring together test pilots and prototype mecha from every nation, creating a bridge for shared knowledge and technology in the advancement of tactical surface fighters. Teresa rolled her eyes at Vincent's excitement, teasing him for acting like he had never seen a tactical surface fighter before. She asked where he came from, and Vincent proudly said he was from Groom Lake, Nevada, home to one of America's biggest research facilities. Noticing the pilot insignias on Yuya's and Vincent's uniforms, Teresa asked if they were both pilots. Yuya confirmed it. Vincent then told Teresa she should thank Yuya, since without him, her crash might have been far worse. Yuya, however, said that Teresa had handled it herself. Curious, he then asked what kind of pilots the Terminator team were, but Teresa admitted she didn't know much about them either. Meanwhile, Yui was walking alone, feeling lost in the unfamiliar place she had just arrived at. Suddenly, Enia appeared and asked if Yui had lost her way. Enia then kindly showed her the right direction. Yui smiled, feeling a bit embarrassed for getting lost there. Enia was sure that Yui had just arrived, since the look and color of her uniform made it obvious to her. Not long after, Kriska showed up, and Enia immediately ran over to greet her. Yui finally reached the 3rd Allied Forces base, the Yukon Operations Command Center. That day, she was accompanied by Ibrahim as they headed toward a meeting room. Ibrahim introduced the members of their new team. 2nd Lieutenant Yuya, a skilled pilot from the U.S. Tactical Military School, 2nd Lieutenant Stella from Sweden, 2nd Lieutenant Vincent from Italy, 2nd Lieutenant Teresa from Nepal, and Lieutenant Yui herself, representing the Japanese Imperial Forces. Ibrahim, who came from Turkey, held the rank of lieutenant and served as the captain of the Argos unit. Ibrahim explained that their team would be participating in the development of the XFJ project. Suddenly, a man walked in and said that the XFJ project was a joint development effort by the Boeing Corporation based on Japan's Type 94 tactical robot model. Ibrahim introduced the man as Frank, a technical advisor from Boeing. He then explained that the purpose of the day's training was for all XFJ project members to get to know each other better. Valerio asked if they were going to infiltrate Lilfort, but Ibrahim denied it. Instead, he said they would take on something more challenging, Case 47, which involved a region filled with laser-class Betha units. Yuya quietly looked around at his teammates and realized that Italy, Sweden, and Japan were all countries that had lost territory to the Betha. He began to think that this project wasn't simply about cooperation between the US and Japan. Ibrahim then divided them into teams. Team A consisted of Valerio and Teresa, while Team B included Stella and Yuya. Yuya was assigned to take the captain's tactical robot for the mission. Teresa immediately questioned why Yuya was using the captain's unit. Ibrahim explained that Yuya was the lead pilot for the XFG project. Teresa didn't seem to take it well and questioned why Yuya was chosen as the main pilot. Ibrahim simply told everyone to prepare their tactical robots by 1325. Afterward, Teresa and Stella changed into their pilot suits in the locker room. Teresa complained about Yuya being the captain and said she felt sorry for Stella for having to look after the newcomer. But Stella thought Yuya seemed decent enough. Teresa was surprised that someone like Yuya fit Stella's type, but Stella just smiled. Confidently, Teresa said she could beat Yuya in less than 30 seconds. Stella advised her not to underestimate him, reminding her that Yuya was a Raptor test pilot. Teresa brushed it off, saying it didn't matter, and claimed she would make sure Yuya passed Argos' so-called initiation. Meanwhile, Valerio asked Yuya what brought an elite American pilot to the base. Yuya replied that there were many reasons for him being there. Suddenly, Teresa approached them, clearly upset. She protested that she couldn't accept Yuya piloting the captain's unit, even though it was a direct order. Hearing her complaints, Yuya calmly offered to let her take the captain's unit instead. Teresa, irritated, asked if Yuya thought he was better than her. Yuya replied that he had never actually operated a captain's unit before, so he would rather use his standard tactical robot. Teresa said she would switch with him if that was what he wanted. Yuya agreed and began walking away. Still annoyed, Teresa followed him and told him he should be thankful that she was willing to switch. Yuya gently patted her head before leaving. Teresa fumed and shouted that he shouldn't come crying to her later if he regretted it. Yuya climbed into his tactical robot and Vincent immediately scolded him for switching units without thinking about the mechanics involved. Yuya replied that the system error rate of a tactical robot was only about 1%, then complimented Vincent's skill. Vincent smiled proudly, claiming to be the best mechanic in the world. After that, Yuya said his goodbyes and began the launch sequence. The tactical robot moved forward and took off. At the same time, Ibrahim, Yudi, and Frank monitored the mission from the command center, while the control post guided their tactical training through the operation. At that time, the Argos team had already entered the training arena. Yuya asked if Stella had seen their opponent, but she hadn't yet. There were too many signal jammers in the area. Realizing they could only rely on visual detection, Yuya told Stella to keep trying to locate the enemy. He said he had no intention of losing, and Stella replied that as a skilled pilot herself, she also wanted to win. Moments later, Valerio locked onto Yuya's position. Noticing the danger, Yuya quickly evaded while Valerio kept firing and teasing him, calling him Top Gun, because American weapons were known to be some of the best in the world. Yuya kept dodging the attacks, surprised by how agile Valerio was even in such a narrow space. He hadn't expected Valerio to be the one attacking. He had thought it would be Yui instead. Before long, Teresa appeared and opened fire on Yuya. She declared that Yuya was her target and told Valerio to back off. Yuya dodged Teresa's shots and realized that her active unit had a clear advantage in speed. Soon, Teresa and Valerio cornered Yuya together, but suddenly, a precise shot from Stella almost hit Valerio. He was startled and felt lucky that the attack missed. It had been perfectly timed. Yuya and Stella focused their fire on Teresa, who tried to evade but found Valerio blocking her path. Frustrated, she told him to take care of Stella instead. Teresa continued chasing Yuya and fired another burst that nearly hit Valerio by accident. She checked her ammo. Only about 300 rounds of her 36mm bullets remained and grew irritated that none of her shots had landed properly on Yuya. Meanwhile, Valerio and Stella moved toward Area D. Yuya's tactical surface fighter had developed an issue in its right arm. Watching from the control room, Ibrahim remarked that Yuya was doing fairly well, but Frank commented that Yuya seemed to be struggling against the active unit. Valerio kept chasing Stella, who smiled and said that he would probably regret it later. At the same time, Teresa was still on Yuya's tail. Yuya turned and began shooting at her from above, landing a few hits. Teresa drew her sword, deciding to settle things in close combat, and kept pressing forward while Yuya continued firing back. When his bullets finally ran out, he threw his weapon toward her as a distraction and flew upward to create distance. Frank admitted that Yuya was impressive, but Ibrahim noted that Teresa was a close combat expert. Yuya then drew his own sword and charged at her. Teresa turned to intercept, but Yuya intentionally rammed into her to break the engagement. Meanwhile, Stella was still being pursued by Valerio. She led him into a tight corridor where he thought she had given up, only to realize too late that she had planted explosives there. The explosion disabled his unit, and Valerio was officially out of the match. Back on Yuya's side, things were looking bad. He couldn't overpower Teresa in close combat. Just as Teresa was about to strike, a long-range shot from Stella hit the head and cockpit area of Teresa's unit with perfect accuracy. The mission was over. The winners were Yuya and Stella. Teresa was visibly frustrated. After the exercise, the four of them gathered and talked. Valerio praised Stella for her bold move. Yuya said they all shared the same goal. Valerio then told Teresa that no matter how strong she was, she couldn't win alone. Teresa snapped back, blaming him for not backing her up, but Valerio reminded her that she was the one who told him to chase Stella instead. Stella then scolded Yuya, telling him not to get cocky. If it had been a one-on-one match, Teresa might have beaten him. Valerio chimed in, reminding everyone that it was a team match. Stella proudly claimed that she and Yuya made the stronger team, while Valerio calmed Teresa down and said they could still learn something from Top Gun Yuya. Hearing that, Yuya jokingly called Valerio Macaroni, and Valerio asked him to use the nickname VVV instead. Teresa laughed at their banter. Yuya turned to her and called her Shorty, which annoyed her immediately. Vincent showed up and was amused that Yuya had already started giving out nicknames again, saying that Yuya definitely had a talent for that. Stella then asked for a nickname of her own. Valerio was about to make a teasing comment, but Yuya quickly stopped him and instead called Stella Venus. She looked flattered, and everyone burst into laughter. From a distance, Ibrahim quietly watched their cheerful camaraderie. Valerio then officially welcomed Yuya as the newest member of the Argos team. One day, Yuya was training alone with his tactical surface fighter. He flew over the forest, but it seemed like he was having some trouble. To him, the machine felt way too sensitive, and he even started to suspect it might be malfunctioning, since it was so hard to control. Eventually, he lost balance and fell. After that, Yuya returned to the base. Vincent immediately walked up to him and handed him a drink, curious as to why Yuya was back so soon when his training wasn't even finished. Yuya explained that the tactical surface fighter was difficult to handle, then muttered something about a Japanese doll that annoyed him. Vincent asked if he meant Yugi by that. Yuya said that back at his house there used to be an old traditional Japanese doll. It looked like a person but had a pale, lifeless face that used to scare him as a kid. Vincent couldn't help but laugh after hearing that. He then explained that Japanese and American tactical surface fighters were built with completely different designs and combat styles, so it was natural for Yuya to have a hard time adjusting. That made Vincent realize why Yugi had insisted Yuya train with a Japanese-made unit before the Type 94 Shirinu was ready for use. Earlier, Yugi had asked Yuya to train using the Type 97 Fubuki. Yuya was clearly annoyed when she told him that, wondering if she hadn't even looked at his records. Yui noticed how upset he was, but Yuya told her she had no reason to be irritated over something like that. Yudi asked if his attitude had anything to do with his feelings about the mission, but Yuya denied it. When she asked if he had a personal issue with her, he denied that too. Yudi then told Yuya to fix his attitude because his behavior had been quite disrespectful. Yuya coldly asked if that was an official order from the XFJ project or if Yui was just using her position for her own satisfaction. Yui didn't care how he saw her. What mattered to her was that he corrected his behavior. Meanwhile, Stella, Teresa, and Valeria were watching their conversation from a distance. Teresa couldn't believe how tense the atmosphere had become. Valerio understood how Yuya felt, but also noticed how much Yuya seemed to enjoy teasing Yui. Stella was confused. After all, both of them were Japanese. Vincent then explained that actually both he and Yuya were American. Yui was surprised considering Yuya had dual nationality, American and British, but since he also had Japanese heritage, she felt his attitude reflected poorly on Japan. Yuya got irritated when she said that. Yui simply told him to make sure he was comfortable with the Fubuki before the next training session. Yuya insisted that he considered himself American. Vincent later admitted he thought Yuya was about to hit Yui during their argument, but Yuya made it clear that he would never raise his hand against a woman. Vincent joked, asking if that was part of a Japanese code of honor, like Bushido. Then he reminded Yuya that it wasn't just about controlling the tactical surface fighter. Each machine reflected the mindset of the people who built it. If Yuya wanted to master a Japanese unit, he had to start by understanding how Japanese people think. Vincent encouraged him to take another flight since they would be training with other units the next day. The following day, Argos flight began their training session. The command post reminded them to maintain altitude and increase their speed. Teresa asked Yuya how his training with the Japanese unit was going. Yuya said he had no problems and was confident he could handle any kind of tactical surface fighter. Teresa challenged him to prove it. Stella smiled and said the goddess of victory would surely be on his side. Hilaria reported that the Scarlet Twins had arrived. Teresa immediately grew tense, wanting to prove who was in charge. Stella gently reminded her to calm down since it was only a joint exercise to practice intercepting Betha, not an actual fight. Stella added that Teresa should stop being so uptight, but Teresa jokingly said she wasn't tense at all, she was just ready to show them what she could do. Yuya was deeply curious about the pilots known as the Scarlet Twins. He couldn't find any detailed information about them in the pilot records. The command post soon instructed Argos flight to prepare at the starting point, activating the wide data link network. The JIES system came online shortly after, and not long after that, the virtual Betha units appeared. The Argos team began their simulated descent to engage the enemy. Yuya was surprised by the sheer number of Betha. Teresa wondered why he was shocked, explaining that such numbers were pretty common in Asia. Valerio even added that it was the same in Europe. The mission started. Stella asked what formation they should take, and Yuya instructed them to approach using the Arrowhead 1 formation. As he went on the offensive, Yuya dodged several attacks and returned fire. He noticed that his tactical surface fighter was still overly sensitive, just like the day before, and started to suspect that something might be wrong with the machine. The rest of Argos flight continued firing at the approaching Betha. Suddenly, Yuya was surrounded. Valerio wondered how that could happen and suspected a technical malfunction. Yuya struggled to control his unit, frustration building with every movement. Meanwhile, at the command post, the Scarlet Twins were informed that they had eliminated 122 Bethas so far, which the operator considered slow progress. The twins were instructed to increase their kill ratio by 7%. Kriska acknowledged the order. Inia then noticed that a nearby tactical surface fighter seemed to be in trouble. Kriska scanned it and discovered that the pilot was Yuya. She calmly told Inia not to worry about other teams and to focus on the enemies in front of them. At that moment, Yuya was almost struck by a Betha, but Teresa provided cover fire from above, saving him. She was confused as to why Yuya seemed to be struggling so much. Valerio and Stella closed in to assist as the number of Betha continued to rise and surround Yuya. Together, they cleared the immediate area, though Yuya remained silent, still having trouble controlling his machine. After the training session ended, Yuya was visibly frustrated, feeling that he had only slowed his teammates down. Vincent tried to calm him, saying that what he needed was simply more practice, but Yuya told Giselle that it wasn't that simple. Just then, Yui arrived and suggested that the issue might be because Yuya couldn't handle the Fubuki unit properly. She said that if he truly understood his tactical surface fighter, that problem wouldn't happen, just like how she could make fine adjustments instead of forcing it forward all the time. Yui bluntly stated that the Fubuki model was poorly optimized. Vincent nearly stepped in to stop her, but Yui continued, saying she wanted Yuya to hear her out. Yuya explained that the unit's main engine was too weak, only performing well at certain speeds, and that its extreme maneuverability made it hard to balance. Yui disagreed, claiming that the Fubuki was actually one of the most user-friendly models among Japan's tactical surface fighters. Even in the middle of battle, Imperial Japanese pilots could handle it smoothly, and some trainee pilots were already capable of operating it well. She concluded that Yuya's control was below even that of a Japanese trainee and remarked that he lacked the natural feel for the unit. The insult left Yuya stunned. Later that evening, Yuya went out for a walk alone. He admitted to himself that the Fubuki wasn't actually broken, but he still couldn't accept Yui's harsh words so easily. A sudden gust of wind caught his attention. Inia appeared and asked if he was feeling cold. When Yuya turned toward her, he told her he was fine. Inia commented that he looked like someone who had just been scolded, but Yuya denied it. Then, without warning, Inia linked her arm with his and cheerfully said she wanted to introduce him to Kriska and Misha, who were always with her. Yuya asked if Kriska and Misha were her family. Inia nodded and said she was sure that meeting Misha would make him feel better. She then gently pulled Yuya along with her. Meanwhile, Teresa and Stella were taking a shower after training. Teresa couldn't figure out what was going on with Yuya. Stella thought that the Japanese tactical surface fighters were quite different from others, and that they should help Yuya until he got used to them. Teresa suggested they invite Yuya out for a drink to help him relax and forget about his troubles. Stella teasingly asked if Teresa was trying to cheer him up, and Teresa, embarrassed, quickly denied it, saying she only wanted to mess with him a little. Suddenly, Valerio's voice came from nearby saying it wasn't a bad idea. Teresa and Stella were both startled to find him there. Teresa immediately rushed toward Valerio, scolding him and throwing him out of the changing area. Meanwhile, Eniel led Yuya to a hidden place with Russian letters written on the walls. She asked Yuya to keep following her. Yuya wondered if he was even allowed to enter that area as they walked through a long corridor and took an elevator. He still couldn't figure out what kind of place it was. Once they reached a small room, Inia picked up a teddy bear from her bed and showed it to Yuya. That's when he realized that the bear's name was Misha. Inia then told Misha to greet Yuya, which left him surprised. He was confused about how Inia knew his name since he hadn't introduced himself yet. Suddenly, Kriska appeared and pointed a gun at Yuya. Inia quickly stepped in front of him, trying to stop Kriska from pulling the trigger. When Yuya was a child, he once overheard his grandfather scolding his mother for trusting a Japanese man, who happened to be Yuya's father. His mother defended him, saying it wasn't his father's fault and that she never regretted meeting him. Yuya's grandfather believed Japanese people were cunning and untrustworthy, claiming that his daughter had been deceived and abandoned. However, his mother insisted that Japanese people also had good qualities: kindness, politeness, and diligence. Growing up, Yuya was often isolated by other kids because of his mixed heritage. He started to believe that Japanese people were deceitful and tended to attack from the shadows. One day, he asked his mother why everyone avoided him. Suddenly, in his dream, his mother turned into a Japanese doll and told him he had brought shame upon Japan. Yuya then woke up from his nightmare. At that moment, he found himself in a prison cell, having been captured earlier by Soviet forces. He wondered who Inia and Kriska really were. He didn't think he would be dismissed just because of what had happened, not after everything he had done so far. News of his arrest soon reached Yui. When Soviet soldiers came to interrogate him, they prepared to inject him with something. They mocked him, questioning why a lowly Japanese man had ended up in the restricted area. Yuya protested, saying he wasn't Japanese. The Soviets knew he was an American soldier, but they also knew about his Japanese bloodline. Yuya grew frustrated, wondering why people still labeled him that way no matter where he went. As the soldiers came closer, he shouted for them to stop. Moments later, an officer entered the room and whispered something to the soldiers. Shortly after Yuya was released, his teammates came to pick him up and take him back. During the ride, Teresa laughed at Yuya, saying he looked like a lost baby chick. Yuya, still annoyed, called Teresa short as usual, though he could smell the alcohol on her breath. Valerio said he was relieved that Yuya got out safely. Stella added that it was Yui who had informed the authorities about Yuya's situation and handled all the UN paperwork for his release. Yuya guessed it was because he had missed a scheduled training session. Stella mentioned that Teresa had been yelling in the hangar, demanding to go save him. Teresa turned red and tried to brush it off, saying she just wanted to invite him out for drinks. Yuya muttered that he had no reason to thank that Japanese doll Yui, but he did apologize to his team for all the trouble he caused that day. His friends burst out laughing, with Teresa teasing him non-stop. The group spent the rest of the ride laughing together. That night, Yuya stood quietly, staring at the tactical surface fighter. He thought about Vincent's advice to understand the Japanese mindset if he wanted to truly master a Japanese TSF. Suddenly, Yuri appeared. Yuya told her he had no intention of thanking her. He suspected she only helped because she didn't want to lose someone who could pilot what he called a trash TSF. Yui didn't react to his sarcasm. She told him that during real combat, he wouldn't get another chance to escape like he did in the simulation. She explained that while teamwork might work in a mock battle, it was a different story in the field. Yuya admitted he was embarrassed about what happened earlier and couldn't believe Yui referred to that day's drill as a game. Yui calmly explained that it was a game, because in a simulation, they knew the enemy's numbers, abilities, and every possible move. Against the Betha, though, nothing could ever be predicted. They were countless, powerful, and overwhelming in numbers. Yet Yuya still blamed his TSF for his failure. Yui reminded him that their predecessors had managed to hold the line against the Betha even with less capable TSFs. Yuya asked whether relying on tricks and clever tactics to develop those machines, something Japanese engineers often did, wasn't also just playing around. Later that night, Inia and Kriska relaxed together in a hot bath. Inia couldn't stop thinking about Yuya and admitted she was curious about him. Kriska told her not to worry about Yuya and warned her not to get too close, saying that their family only consisted of the two of them. Inia replied that Misha was also part of their family. She smiled, saying she loved feeling the warmth of being with Kriska, and wondered why Yuya and Yui always seemed so cold toward each other. That day, Yuya was training to pilot a Japanese tactical surface fighter. He was flying it through a long underground tunnel, and the machine's sensors kept warning him to stay centered. But Yuya was clearly struggling. He kept pushing forward at high speed, sometimes even scraping the tunnel walls. The machine was harder to control than the Type 97 model. The command post reported that he had passed checkpoint 34 minutes and 52 seconds behind schedule. Yuya looked frustrated. The tunnel was full of sleeper drifts that made maneuvering even harder. He adjusted the proximity line and lowered the pilot's safety settings to the minimum. He refused to let the machine beat him again. He kept firing at simulated enemies and pushed the throttle to soar upward, bursting out of the tunnel into open air. When Yuya returned to base, Vincent immediately approached him. He couldn't believe Yuya had turned off the pilot's safety systems again. Yuya said that even so, it saved him 25 seconds. A moment later, Yui walked over and asked if he had anything he wanted to say. Yuya admitted that he thought he had already mastered the handling of Japanese-made tactical surface fighters based on the Type 97, but he realized he was wrong. This new one was even more unstable than before. Yui explained that the Type 1C tactical surface fighter was based on the Type 2 and was designed with a full focus on combat capability. That was exactly why it was harder to control. She said the Type 97 required a balance of gentle touch, courage, and refined piloting skill, maybe a bit too much for Yuya at that point. Annoyed, Yuya argued that he had already been training with the machine for 18 hours and still had 32 simulations left to go. He was sure that before the test period ended, he would master it completely. Vincent could only sigh at his determination. The next day, Yuya continued his training in the Japanese tactical surface fighter. His mission that time was to engage with drones. The command post reported that they had lost contact with the 6th drone and ordered Yuya to head toward grid E92 to retrieve it. He realized that Soviet forces were using E92 for their own training, so he needed to act fast before things got complicated. Yuya flew toward E92 and spotted the missing drone. But before he could get to it, the drone exploded, shot down by another tactical surface fighter. The pilot turned out to be Kriska. She told Yuya to back off since the area was under Soviet training jurisdiction. They even warned they would open fire if he got any closer. Yuya calmly explained that he only wanted to retrieve the lost drone. Suddenly, Inia greeted him cheerfully, asking if he was chasing a runaway drone. Kriska reminded her not to chat with Yuya since they were still in training. Not long after, the Soviet command post called Kriska and Inia back to continue their exercises. Before leaving, Inia waved goodbye to Yuya with a smile. That's when Yuya finally realized that Kriska and Inia were the infamous Scarlet Twins. That night, while buying a drink from a vending machine, Yuya asked Teresa about the Scarlet Twins. Teresa complained that Kriska and Enia were annoying but warned Yuya not to bother them, since they were already her own targets to deal with. Suddenly, Valerio jumped in to tease Teresa, telling her not to come begging others for help. Teresa immediately chased after him, yelling in frustration. Left standing there, Yuya wondered what exactly everyone was so afraid of. He muttered in irritation, blaming the tactical surface fighter, which he now considered more like a steel coffin than a weapon. That night, Yuya washed his face with cold water, trying to cool down his anger and clear his head. Later, he confronted Yui, demanding to know what kind of tactical surface fighter they planned to build if they kept ignoring the feedback from the pilots. Yui was surprised that he called the machine useless. She quoted a Japanese saying, "A rider and their horse are one." She explained that for Japanese pilots, trusting the machine and bringing out its full potential mattered more than simply controlling it. She had hoped Yuya would be honest with himself about that. Yuya replied that test pilots also risked their lives to create machines they could trust, and that was his pride as a pilot. He refused to let another pilot die in a tactical surface fighter he had tested. Yui, however, told him that his pride didn't matter and walked away. Confused, Yuya asked why she was leaving like that. Yui turned back and said the XSG project wasn't made to satisfy a test pilot's pride. His obsession with American-style design was practically taking over the project. She told him not to disappoint her again. Yuya shouted back in anger, but Valerio quickly stepped in to calm him down. Still, Yuya couldn't accept being accused of trying to take over the project. The next day, Yuya and his friends went out for drinks at a bar. Teresa vented her frustration by chugging her drink, and Yuya couldn't help wondering what was bothering her. Stella smiled and said that Teresa was upset because of what had happened to Yuya earlier. Apparently, Vincent had to stop Teresa when she got emotional after seeing Yuya argue with Yui. That was when Yuya realized that his friends had actually seen the whole argument. Valerio mentioned that Yui came from a noble samurai family and was also a member of the Imperial Royal Guard, one of Japan's elite units. Teresa then told everyone to drop the topic, reminding them that the night was supposed to be Yuya's welcome party. They all raised their glasses and toasted to Yuya's arrival in Alaska. A moment later, the bar waitress brought them some snacks. While leaning over the table, her large chest accidentally pressed against Teresa's head. She casually asked if they wanted to order their usual menu. Valerio teased her, joking that he wanted to order 2 big melons. The waitress, a cheerful French woman named Natalie, turned to Yuya and said it was her first time seeing him. She introduced herself and Yuya shook her hand with a polite smile. Teresa, flustered, complained about Natalie's chest being too close to her. Yuya looked a bit worried about the commotion, but Stella just laughed, saying that it was nothing new. Valerio added that Teresa and Natalie often clashed because they were both stubborn in their own way. When Stella asked for a food recommendation for Yuya's welcome party, Natalie suggested they try real meat instead of synthetic meat. Valerio immediately agreed since he was tired of eating artificial food. Teresa doubted it would be affordable, but Natalie promised her a special discount. Grateful, Teresa hugged Natalie in thanks, and Natalie playfully told her to come along as payment. Later, everyone burst out laughing when Teresa returned. Natalie had dressed her in a cat-made costume. Teresa, red-faced, explained that Natalie had forced her to wear it.